everyone, Pineapple here with the final part of Dark Gallifrey's second story, The War Master. Last episode was quite the doozy. Coming after a disappointing first part, it had great characters, great performance, and a writer who knew how to make their interactions and dynamics interesting and entertaining. While still good, Morbius Part 3 was the worst of its run, and I hope that trend doesn't repeat here, based on how low I had to rate Part 1, but I'm optimistic. So let's hop into Dark Gallifrey, The War Master, Part 3. Once again, we start with a previously on segment, which with these spread releases is always appreciated. Then the story starts proper with John shit scared of the Abomination, as the Master laughs at how much of a mess it is. Perhaps not the appropriate reaction, but pretty funny.
A man made of shadows, a squid made of memories, a jar full of nightmares all at once. Lunacy!
The Master is astounded and attempts to weaponize the creature, but it decides it'd rather feed, the Master tossing John into it as he escapes. John wakes up on a sunny plain met by Benny, who explains that this Dark Gallifrey is all that's left of the original, once many doctors dealt with it, the whole stain left being the Abomination, and that John is now its latest battery. Well, that may not explain what Dark Gallifrey actually is, but at least it gives us an explanation as to what this Gallifrey is. This Benny is an actualization, a bit out of character, but the remnant of her from her last time here. She tells John to run away from a coming threat as the Master tries to steal a TARDIS, the Abomination following him around and taunting him as what seems to be a small child version of himself. In what is not that very well communicated, but a pretty terrifying idea, the Abomination makes the TARDISes scream, as John is still travelling, but the Abomination takes on a different form and is almost coming on to him? The Master is infuriated at the caricature below him, but comes across one of the more ancient TARDISes, coming face to console with the talking TARDIS from before. John is thinking he's gonna get some, but instead the Abomination starts tearing his earlier memories out to see them. Once again, a pretty terrifying idea with an okay execution, but the audio just not really getting the visual across. The Master is still trying to get away, but the TARDIS is resilient, immediately getting on his nerves and analysing him, offending the Time Lord as he tries to sit the adventure out, much to the Master's dismay. John is found after the attack by the War Doctor, and I have to say it's nice to see the War Doctor around in this story. But the cover art, if you look at the details, does give you a hint as to what capacity he's here in. Another illusion like Benny, but he's a little more independent of a memory, guiding and helping John along. Jonathan Carley plays the War Doctor and does pretty well, even if the material is a little iffy due to him being even less real than 4 was in Morbius. But he puts his all into it, adding him well to the cast. The Doctor makes an impassioned monologue about how beautiful the planet used to be, as they see it from the memory they're stuck in. And the Master is told by the TARDIS that he won't leave, but will protect the Master within his walls, letting him live out his natural life to death, and sends him to find the food machine, which doesn't go over well. John wonders about just spending his time as a farmer and explains how he got here. The Doctor, who is revealed to be a memory of the Master's, dismaying at what he calls gossip, and reiterating what the Abomination and its Dark Gallifrey is, making this the second Dark Gallifrey line to not go to Dark Gallifrey. But like I said before, at least now we know what this Gallifrey is. The Doctor points towards the horizon, seeing this memory's version of the Citadel in the distance, although it takes a while for John to notice, and with prodding from the Doctor, he decides to make the trek, and if it goes wrong...
If not, I could come back here and get on with raising aubergines.
Cool.
That too.
The Master is wandering around the TARDIS, making his way to a service hatch, since the console is disabled, so he decides to open it up in an area the TARDIS can't control, an area unknown to TARDISes, but quite important. So while he keeps the TARDIS occupied, he starts burning circuits and deleting rooms. John's made his way near the Citadel with the Doctor, getting quite tired and regaling the Doctor with his previous plan to scrap the planet. But now all he wants to do is go home. But it can't be that easy as his arm starts fading away. Back in the TARDIS, the Master explains he can do this because the TARDISes aren't allowed to eject rooms by themselves to keep the pilot safe. And as the TARDIS loses parts of himself, he calls Uncle and gives in. John is still freaking out about his fading arm, so the Doctor hurries him to the capital. The closer he gets, more parts of him starting to fade. The confusion and shock very well acted by James Masters. The Master is very self-satisfied and decides to send the TARDIS into, quote, the heart of the storm, as the TARDIS does its best Cleveland impression.
We're going into the heart of the storm.
No, 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 no.
No, 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 no!
The Doctor and John are feet away from the capital, once again greatly acted. More of him starts fading and the Doctor does well to cheer him to the finish line, while the Master decides to block the entryway to the Abomination's Gallifrey, giving him leverage over the creature. And it's not the most comfortable position for the TARDIS to be in. We switch back to John, and while the cutting back and forth works well in the story, it doesn't really sound good in the review form, does it? A lot of
And then.
The Doctor continues to push John while the Master waits for the Abomination, but the TARDIS decides to take action, learning from the Master's actions from before, and jettisoning the Master, which is a cool move, but didn't we just learn that the TARDISes can't jettison rooms as a way to keep the pilot safe? That might be a little bit of a plot hole unless I'm misunderstanding it. John starts to accuse the Doctor of doing this to him, but he finally reaches the Citadel, starting to rapidly fade and solidify. And this is a crazy plot twist, as John himself becomes a TARDIS as he touches the glass Citadel dome, astounding both me and the Doctor, and boy, do the noises he make just sound that little bit wrong.
I'm a bleeding TARDIS!
The Master lands in the middle of the ghostly panopticon we briefly saw in part 1, filled with the bickering Time Lords who are unable to come to a conclusion of what to do with their shadow Gallifrey. The Master has some choice words for them, lecturing them and telling them to stay quiet. Infuriated they won't use the Abomination as their realm could implode at any second. The Master proclaiming himself as a renegade, attempting to take control, but doesn't get very far as the councillors just want to invite him to debate. The Master reveals he wants to use the Abomination in the Time War, pointing out how rough the Time Lords' transition from glorified bystanders to an army was, him vowing to use the Paradox power to turn them into the warriors they need to be to fight. They seem pretty enthusiastic once he kills their leader, so the Abomination descends to take back control, and pretty easily I might add, turning them into ravaging cannibals ready to feed on his timeline much like she does. John phases out completely and lands in a white void, joined by a pot plant that turns out to be the talking TARDIS, having been turned into one, both temporarily and for an unknown length of time, as a rescue measure thanks to the TARDIS. John has some interesting observations.
Just... do I have a door? How do people get in me?
I've not really... I mean, look, it was a spur-of-the-moment decision.
Look, don't laugh and ask me how I know, but I'm fairly certain there's a swimming pool inside of me. Chlorine.
John is reveling in it, but the TARDIS brings the tone down as it recognises they're both in the Abomination. They start to plan, the TARDIS only now realising who he's dealing with as John flirts with him, which is pretty hilarious. The TARDIS low-key into it, and John promises a date at the end of the universe as he takes off. The Master is just about to be devoured as the Abomination drops his mind in the Dark Tower and asks him to take Rassilon's place, allowing its power to use the Master as a conduit to escape. After a lot of posturing and daydreaming, he decides it's a better fate than Eton, and as he prepares to take over, lying in the tomb, happy to be used in such a destructive plan, with a great use of the Saxon Master's theme, but before it can finish, John lands around him, placing the Master in his rooms, as he had disguised himself as the tomb. The Master is very insistent they leave, so the Abomination can't use them, and eventually John gets over his performance anxiety and moves them away. They land side by side in the death zone, running for their lives, as John has to get used to being more human.
I don't have that much grasp of now anymore. For instance, I look at you and I see how you die, and it's really sad.
Sad?
Also quite funny.
John tries to take off again, landing them back into the Panopticon, and then leaving again as it seems to start crumbling on the other Time Lords. They land by the Doctor as the capital crumbles, but it seems John's run out of TARDIS juice, as the Abomination tears this Gallifrey down to get to them. The Doctor taunts them, explaining that if the abomination gets them, it'll implode them like it planned to escape. So the Master decides that they should both die for the greater good via the companion grenade. Now that he's a TARDIS, the grenade won't work, and in a last-ditch effort, the Master clings to John, attempting to use him as a meat shield. He survives to have a good scene with this Paradox Doctor, them trapped on a barren asteroid left in this now desolate universe. The Doctor starts fading like everything else, leaving only the two criminals. They stand defeated, and the Master tries to get John to materialize them away. John wary as he's only a TARDIS in this universe, and the trip may kill him, but it's either that or stay together in the nothingness forever. But the rocks around them move, as the abomination takes its final form, planning to feed on them as a last bid for power. But this technically being the end of the universe means that the TARDIS is ready for their date, leaving the abomination alone in shock. John is giddy, and the Master is quite defeatist, but the sassy TARDIS has already planned an escape, having befriended Benny and left a backdoor in the trap she made, leaving the abomination's universe as nothing more than a marble. The Master is dropped back before he tried to kill Benny, back in his role as Provost. She notices he's a little bit older, but disregards her thinking, ready to tell him about her new paramour, John. But the Master is feeling satisfied as he finds the marble in his pockets, ready to rule over it, using it as a paperweight. A nice ending for the character in this adventure as he says goodbye to Benny.
Goodbye, Professor.
See you around, Provost?
Yes. Oh, and well played.
And to finish the story off, John and the TARDIS in human form take a stroll, wondering where they stand, but end up cutely holding hands and deciding to stay together with a rhyme and a snog. So that was part 3 of Dark Gallifrey's The War Master. And it wasn't bad. I didn't like it as much as part 2, but it was certainly a more digestible listen than part 1. On the downsides, there was a lot of confusing technobabble, and moments that, while great and entertaining, like John becoming a TARDIS, aren't as justified or well initiated as I wanted. But we get a proper and satisfying ending, good moments for most characters, and continues this arc's kind of explanations when it comes to Dark Gallifrey's identity. The abomination and the Gallifrey it made being what was left behind when the Dark Gallifrey was dealt with by the Doctor. Speaking of the abomination, the only real thing going for it was its connection and torture of Benny. It had a much more fleshed out connection to her than the Master or John, even when both trapped in its warping memory reality. I just wish the antagonist was more fleshed out. But at least this part continues the good performances and writing of both John and the Master. The Master as the main character doesn't feel that justified, honestly. A lot more disappointing than Morbius. But that comes down to his position in the story, not the dialogue or performance. But John got a surprisingly good B-plot, becoming and falling in love with a TARDIS, which, while could have used a little more fleshing out, was a great way to use the character. Him also having a pretty good dynamic with the memory of the War Doctor, pushing him forward to escape the abomination. And I hope that sometime in the future we see more exploits of John and the Doctor. Or maybe even making use of other Big Finish facets and teaming him up with some sort of similar character like Calypso Jones. So, while not as good as part 2, it certainly was easier to experience than part 1, so I'll give Dark Gallifrey The War Master Part 3 a 6.5 out of 10. It wasn't bad or anything, its failings just aren't completely subverted by its positives, putting it in between the last two parts as I thought it would be. Comparing this to Morbius and putting the scores together, that leaves this 3-part story at a 7 out of 10. 1 point under Morbius, which sits at an 8. Both were interesting with great performances, but this story has some fundamental problems, like its focus on Benny and switch to the Master and John, uninteresting villain personality, and a disjointed first part. Whereas in Morbius, the main characters were mostly consistent, and the story worked well in being as congruent as they were. Both are very enjoyable, and the whole of The War Master was very entertaining in writing and acting, so I wish I could rate it higher, but there were a lot of issues. Thank you everybody for watching my review of The War Master Part 3, ending 2024's run of Dark Gallifrey, and I'm excited for what they do next year. Please like the video if you liked it, comment down below if you wish, consider subscribing to the channel, and if you do, ring the notification bells so that you're told every single time that I make an upload. Once again, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next review. Bye!
Toast. A little piece of toast.
because there's so much to choose from. There's brown bread, white bread, all sorts of wholemeal bread. It comes in funny packages with writing on the side.